Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Erickson. This is Cindy McKee and our speaker, Mark Lesniewski. And we welcome you here to Parkrose Community United Church of Christ. The rookies are in charge today, kids, so it'll be a little bumpy. But we welcome you and we give honor to the first people of their ancestors in the land we now use. Please stay together as we do every week. Uh-oh, they left the clicker here with me. Never a good idea. Wherever you are, and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here.
Today our worship's going to focus on mental health, and we are all broken, and yet we are all here, seeking the breath and life we receive in God. Our guest speaker, Mark Lesniewski, is the spiritual director at the Franciscan Spiritual Center. He helped lead us on our last Restocking Your Spiritual Toolkit workshop, and so we're pleased to have him here again. Would you please stand if you're able and join us in our first song.
Clear the chaos and the flood.
Oh, your cheeks.
Let's come together now at the time of prayer.
I need a crowd, Diana.
I need a pause.
This is always my favorite time of church. Good morning, everybody. All right, let's come together now in a time of prayer. Hear the good news. No valley is too despairing, broken, or dusty for God to enter in. No fear, no chaos, no hopelessness is beyond the reach of the one whose breath gives us life. Through Christ, God sees only our wholeness. Through Christ, forgiveness, love, and new life are always possible.
Good morning. Oh, look at you guys. I have so many friends up here. It's so wonderful. Guys, can you see that picture up there? Can you tell me what it looks like somebody's doing? Can you tell me? No? Well, there's a girl that's sleeping. There's a moon in the sky and a person that looks like they're kind of shining their face to the... Does it look like someone might be dreaming? Yeah, okay. All right. Well, that isn't a picture of somebody dreaming. Those are pictures of people dreaming. And one of our scriptures today is about a man named Ezekiel who had dreams. And he was a priest and a prophet who dreamed about the presence of God and those kind of. And so there's one of his dreams was called the Valley of the Dry Bones. And so those are not, the pictures of that painting isn't quite appropriate. So those are mammoth bones, like dinosaur bones. And while that's different, he uses the bones in his dream, talking about coming to life and putting skin and muscle and bones and structures and things like that. So similar to like how scientists do that with, they look like dragon bones, they are quite large. But those are mammoth bones. They found that in some valley on a little island off the coast of Alaska. No, they're not dragon bones. Well, I also have a friend that can illustrate bones and bringing bones to life, the Valley of Bones. When I was a little girl, Katie, just like you, my mother, this is an antique, you guys. She might break. She's called the Visible Woman. She's a model, and she has bones. Can you see all her body parts? And she's even got a baby in her tummy. She's got red hair, just like me and my mom. Veins, and she is a good way to remember that we need to remember how God has put us together and how we're. Yes, she's different hair. That's right. But she's very old. But what do you think? Skeletons? Yeah. Cool beans. Well, I think it's a great analogy to use the bones and God breathing life into us. And so when we think about those bones and scientists giving life to those bones and learning about how those animals lived, we can use the Valley of the Dry Bones in the scriptures kind of for our own life. And do you remember, and now you're new, so you wouldn't necessarily know this, but in our church, in Sunday school, we do a body prayer. So this requires people to stand up. Okay, let's all stand up. And I didn't put this on there, we're gonna, it's easy, we're gonna teach it to you and everything. So we go, Creator God. Creator God. Okay, you have to do the hand.
Okay. Creator God.
Creator God. 3 and 1. Be in this place. Be in my heart. Be in my mind. We love and adore you. So on the theme of, that's our prayer. So go ahead and click that last one. Here's all coming to life. See, it's a belly dancing skeleton. You never think you could find that on the internet, right? But there you go. Bringing bones to life. So anyways, thank you very much for letting me share that moment with you.
Mental health can...
Today's Now Testament is a video from the National Association for Mental Health. Let's see those.
Mental health can be defined as the way that a person thinks. It affects how we feel and relate to others on a daily basis. And it's affected by our genetics, the structure of our brain, our environments, and lifestyles. While we all experience mental health, some of us will deal with a mental health condition or mental illness. Each year, 1 out of 5 people will struggle with a mental health condition or mental illness. It's important to combat stigma, which can lead to stereotypes, and stop those affected from reaching out, leaving them feeling alone and afraid to ask for help, which can contribute to tragic outcomes like suicide, the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S., and the 2nd leading cause of death in youth ages 15 to 24. Stigma does not stop at the people with mental health conditions, but often affects those who care for them, their friends, families, and co-workers as well. At work, mental illness has a large economic impact on employers and to our economy. Each year, the economic impact of depression is more than $200 billion. You have the choice to be stigma-free and provide encouragement and support when someone you care about may be at risk. With the right support and tools, the promise of living well can be a reality. And with a treatment plan, many people can overcome their mental health challenges and find new ways to soar. Through NAMI's Stigma-Free campaign, we are building a movement to effectively break down barriers, encourage understanding, and promote acceptance for everyone affected by mental health conditions. Do your part and take the pledge to be stigma-free. Stand with NAMI to change the way the world sees mental health. To learn more, visit NAMI.org.
Please stand if you're able for Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious is that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. His grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we live there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amen.
We have two scripture readings today. The first one is the story of Ezekiel that Eric has set us up for. Ezekiel 17, 1 through 14. The Valley of the Dry Bones. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord, and set me in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a great rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breathe from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breathed, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, our hope is gone, we are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live. I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord.
Amen.
Our second verse today is from 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 10. God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I would like to introduce our guest speaker today, Mark Lesniewski. After some life-changing mystical experiences in the 1980s, Mark entered a Catholic seminary. This was followed by a Franciscan formation, chaplaincy, spiritual direction studies, marriage and family therapy and counseling, learning meditation, and other mindfulness practices. Mark has spent time with Native American, Quaker, and Episcopalian communities. He has 30 years of service to people experiencing poverty, physical and mental illness, and incarceration. In 2013, Mark received a master's degree in contemplative psychotherapy and Buddhism. Mark, welcome.
Wow, what a setup. Oh my goodness. The last time I was here, I gave this talk on mindfulness and meditation, and there were prayers and things like that before my presentation. And I joked then, and I gotta say, you stole my thunder. So like, it's all been said already. Everything that I want to say and said and sung and danced and just done beautifully. I have been praying over this and pondering this for over 30 years now. These notes I only wrote last night. So I may have to look at them every now and then, but it's a major part of my life. So many images to talk about today. I may actually come down there at some point once my hands stop shaking. So, this is about our vulnerability today. And acknowledging that and embracing it, you know, from womb to tomb, we are vulnerable. No amount of walls or weapons can diminish that, can take that away. We are all vulnerable. And to learn to live with that, embrace it, and be gentle with ourselves around that is some of what this is about. Dry bones in the wilderness. This is our current mental health system. Dry bones. I started in the mental health system back in the early 80s after these conversion experiences happened to me. And during those experiences, I was actually hearing voices every now and then and seeing this bright white light in everything and everybody. That lasted for about 3 years. And so I could see the beauty all around in that light. And had I reported this to the wrong people, I may have been put on medications. And what was actually happening was my heart was opening. You know, in today's energy talk, I had chakras opening like crazy, okay? And I was just interiorly vulnerable, and I'm still an easy cry. I get overwhelmed very easily, and so I may have to take a you know, swab the tears away break every now and then here. So that, I started in the mental health system as a worker. I was with the Franciscans down in Northwest Portland, and I worked in Sister Maria Francis's place, the Franciscan Outreach Ministries in Old Town. Now I come from middle-class white suburbia, south suburb of Chicago, born on the south side of Chicago. Seeing what I saw in Old Town was new. Then to be so close as to be in this agency with those people on the streets, delousing, helping them to try and maintain these little concrete apartments there in the Skid Row area. All sorts of vulnerability. And for the very first month, I think every day that first month of working there, I would walk home. I was with the Franciscans. We were in the Northwest Portland at the time. I'd walk home from Old Town crying. My heart would break every day, several times a day, and nothing I could do about it. Had to let it be. So that was my experience in the early 80s of some of the mental health system. Of course, we would deal with Uber Detox and Central City Concern and some of these other places. And we all were burning out. We all were becoming like dry bones in the desert. We just don't value the vulnerability of folks with mental illness. We don't value our own anxiety and the feelings around that and learn to work with it instead of against it. So fast forward a number of years, and I go to Naropa University, a Buddhist-inspired university in Boulder, Colorado, and I just graduated from there in 2013. And when I went there, I didn't know it at the time, but at the back of my mind, some of what was going on was, okay, I've worked with vulnerable populations for a lot of years, and we don't seem to be getting anywhere. And now, of course, I learned in Buddhist training not to be attached to outcomes, right? Just put your broken heart out there. Just give your broken heart. Without expectations, without attachment to outcomes. So when I went there, I had the classic stereotypes of what Buddhist teachers would be like. Steady, unshakable rocks on top of a mountain peak, right? Sitting there, stable and steady. Whereas at the same time, I'm shaky as all get out. So I'm looking to these people for some help. And on one of the first days, there's this woman teacher there, her name's Karen, and she's been teaching there for years. And she sat at the foot of the master for years, learning meditation and mindfulness and loving kindness from Trungpa himself, a man who has these quotes here. To be a spiritual warrior, one must have a broken heart. Without a broken heart and the sense of tenderness and vulnerability, your warriorship is untrustworthy. And I would say that that is the case too if we're going out there and trying to be with any vulnerable population. That if you can't go out there and recognize your own broken heart and be okay with that and be gentle with your own broken heart, it just doesn't work. So we give those broken hearts knowing that it's being received by another broken heart. All vulnerable. So one of the first days I'm there at Naropa, this teacher who had been there for years, incredibly socially awkward. Now, for those of you who don't know about Trungpa, he like the Dalai Lama, when he was a little boy, led a bunch of people through the Himalayas to India, to safety after China had invaded Tibet. So an amazing man. And Karen learned under Trungpa directly. Karen said to us in her own shakiness, we meet in our awkwardness. We meet in our awkwardness. My brothers and sisters, I feel awkward up here. Are any of you feeling awkward for me? And with me? Okay, yeah. I guess we're at the right place. All right. Go ahead, that other Trungpa quote, please. A little longer. The experience of a sad and tender heart is what gives birth to fearlessness. Conventionally, being fearless means that you are not afraid, or that if someone hits you, you will hit him back. But we aren't talking about that street-level fighter of fearlessness. Real fearlessness is the product of tenderness. It comes from letting the work tickle your heart, your raw heart. You are willing to open up without resistance or shyness and face the world. I hope I'm doing that okay here right now. Thank you, Ronnie. So how did I get those expectations about strength? I grew up on the south side of Chicago in the 60s. Okay? And all the male role models in my life were tough factory workers. Football coaches, you know, that kind of stuff. And I'll never forget one time, something broke through with my father. My father was a very practical man, factory worker, and I had just entered the seminary. Well, I came back from the seminary in the San Francisco Bay Area to the south side of Chicago. Kind of different, right? And I'm there with my mother, who's very much like me, into spirituality and stuff like that. And her and I are having this highfalutin spiritual conversation around the kitchen table. And my dad's sitting there, and he's quiet. My mom and I are introverts. We don't do a lot of talking. My dad's was a flaming extrovert. But he sat there quiet and listened as we were talking. And I usually break up when I tell this story. One time I saw the breakthrough, and it still affects me. So my mom and I stopped talking for a little bit, and my dad, who was a POW in World War II, was in soup and bread lines as a little boy during the Great Depression, this rock of a man. And he says, I really don't know what the two of you are talking about. He said, each day I pray, God, I'm just a stupid man. Help me. This was not a man who was self-deprecating. He wouldn't have survived if he had that kind of spirit. This is not a guy who would typically put himself down. I'm a stupid man. Help me. Years later, I saw the movie Romero, about Oscar Romero, the Archbishop from El Salvador, who was assassinated. And I'll never forget a part in the movie. This is an archbishop from a macho country, and he's supposed to be this macho leader. And at some point after his friends, some Jesuit priests, were assassinated, he goes out to their gravesite and he's there by himself. And it's very similar to the scene of Dry Bones. This scene in this dusty wasteland with the markers, the grave markers of the priests, his friends. And suddenly it just hits him. Bam, he goes down on his knees. And he prays, Lord, I can't. You must. I am yours. Show me the way. I can't. You must. I am yours. Show me the way. I get out, I graduate from Naropa. I go back into the community mental health field as a therapist and case manager. 60 chronically, severely mentally ill people on my caseload. The system dry bones. The insurance for people with mental health. The rules are made up by people who have no clue what's going on the ground. No clue. Minimal resources, dry bones in the wilderness. How many times I could have said that prayer, both prayers, my father's and Archbishop Romero's. I'm just a stupid man, help me. I can't. You must. I am yours. Show me the way. The chapter before the chapter that we just heard from Ezekiel, chapter 36, God says this to Ezekiel, tells him to speak this to the people. I shall give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I shall remove the heart of stone. Does that sound like a process that's going to tickle? I shall remove your heart of stone from your bodies and give you a heart of flesh instead. Pick up the contrast, stone and flesh. Okay. Do you see the contrast in the world today? Stony hearts, fleshy hearts. Okay? I shall put my spirit within you. Wow. Wow. So we have juxtaposed the old paradigm, both within mental health treatment and the way we walk around the streets and encounter people with mental illness, homeless people, whatever it may be, one of toughness and hardening our hearts so that we can just get through it. And maybe if I give you $1, you'll walk away from me and I won't have to see you again. Sweep it under the carpet. Don't see it. Old paradigm. New paradigm. Give your broken hearts. All sorts of ways that might look. I'm not going to come here and tell you this is exactly how you're supposed to treat a mentally ill person when you encounter them. And I'm saying them, but I know inside of me, I've got levels of mental disturbance too, and emotional. You know, I deal with anxiety, especially these days, middle of the night. What am I going to do? So it's broken heart to broken heart is the oncoming paradigm. Between nations, between people, between us and our four-legged and feathered friends. Of course, we all know there are forces that are fighting paradigm shift, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't want to minimize that, and at the same time, I don't want it all to be about finger pointing. There's things in me that are fighting this new paradigm shift. I'm afraid. I'm afraid. I'm vulnerable. And if I stand here and try and This posture, have you seen this in the news lately? Right? What does that tell you? I'm afraid. And again, no amount of guns and walls is going to disarm. Now, I don't know about you folks, but I've had a lot of time praying in front of the crucifix. And what I see there is the person that I follow and claim to be my Lord and Savior, naked, exposed, vulnerable. I have here in my pocket my mother's holy card from her funeral, and it has the Sacred Heart on there, the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Oh, and by the way, this isn't meant to be a snarky comment, but I know at some point on that crucifix, on that naked body on the cross, vulnerable, exposed, there was no loincloth to begin with. You know, again, I'm not saying that to be snarky, but we're talking intense vulnerability, as open as can be. That's our model. Not this. It takes courage to disarm. There's my bumper sticker, huh? It takes courage to disarm. Kind of skip over a few things here. I said I wrote this up the other night, and I had a friend help me. I was just pouring stuff out of my heart that has been, like I said, I've been pondering this since the early 80s. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity to be with you here today. So she wrote down some of what I said, and I'm going to read it to you. I never did receive the gifts I'd hoped for from my teachers at Naropa. They didn't share with me the secrets of how to be invincible, whole, and righteous. They didn't even seem to care about trying to demonstrate those qualities. Instead, the gifts they gave me were the honoring of my broken heart, affirmation of my humanity, and permission to be vulnerable to myself and others. And I have discovered that the more I can embrace my own wounds, the less I despise those who are wounded. I want to repeat that. The more I can embrace my own wounds, the less I despise those who are wounded. Can you see how that alone would make a huge difference in our world?
Yeah.
And it starts here. It starts with community and spiritual practice. Thank you for being here today on this holiday weekend. What you're doing right now is an intense spiritual practice that's helpful for when you go out there. So thank you for being here. My broken heart meets theirs. And humanity's approach, our approach to our care for people with mental illness, in order to be effective and sustainable, must shift in ways that support our shared humanity and interconnectedness. Many of those who work out there and who deal with mental illness already know this. So I'm going to come down there and finish up with a dream here. But before I do that, you know that Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Okay. It's part of that first great commandment when Jesus is asked, about the greatest commandment. He said, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. In mystical language, if you get that, the rest is commentary. We're one. in Christ. Once you get that, the rest is commentary. You don't have to say, do unto others as you would have to do them unto you, because you know it in your bones and your sinews that we are one. What I do to myself, I do to others, and what I do to others, I do to myself. It's all one. I know that sounds woo-woo and all that, but you know it. I see heads nodding. You know it in your very bones and sinews. So, we talked about Ezekiel and dreaming. Not too long ago, I had a dream. I was standing in a hallway in a modern kind of home, and standing by against one wall, and through the other wall, maybe 5 feet away from me, this old man comes through the wall. You know, kind of like Jesus after the resurrection, comes through the walls and the doors and stuff like that. Well, this old man comes through, and he has the classic Old Testament prophet look, you know, the stereotype. He's got the chiseled face and the long gray beard and the long gray hair, and, you know, those eyes that would just pierce right through you. And I look at him, and I get close to him, and I point at him, and I said, "You're the prophet Ezekiel." We've heard Ezekiel's, what his message was to be, right? You're the prophet Ezekiel. He comes up in my face, up that close, and he says to me, "You're the prophet Ezekiel." He backs up and goes out through the wall. I'm down here to tell you now, you're the prophet Ezekiel. Hear, O Israel, Israel, the family of humanity. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, regardless of our mental state. Thank you.
In our denomination and many others, communion and the serving of the elements of bread and wine is meant to be done only by ordained ministers. Pastor Don encouraged us to still have some form of communion together since it's the first Sunday of the month. So we are building on a service that was used during Pastor Don's sabbatical. Thank you to the people who came before us. And we are having a love feast. And following in the tradition of the UCC in Parkrose, it's a potluck. Please come forward and drop off your offering and then help yourself to crackers, gluten-free crackers, cookies or sugar-free cookies, and a cup of juice. We will feel a little familiar and a little out of step, but that's okay. And it's okay if we fumble a bit and it isn't perfect. As you know, some shared meals are not perfect, but they are always blessed.
Amen.
The next slide. Jesus' ministry often focused on sharing a meal with people, whether one was one with Zacchaeus or with the vast multitude on a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Meals are times when we share with each other in a more intimate way, and the symbolic meal we are going to share here invites us all into that connection, one to one, many to many, to which God calls us. When we share food with each other, we share God's love and compassion. We are reminded of the ways Jesus showed us to carry that compassion into every corner of our lives, into every connection we make. May this meal nurture our expressions of God's expansive love. All are welcome at this table with no exceptions. Please come. And we'll do this the way we normally do. Start here and then work our ways back up. Dave.
Come peace of heaven and earth. Come to the table of plenty. God will provide for all countries. We're at the table of plenty. Oh, come and eat without money. I come to drink without
God for the people of God.
We've come to that part of our service where we ask for prayers of the community. I'd like to lift up both Cammie Pugley and June Stewart. Cammie was hospitalized earlier this week. She's home now recovering, but will be home for a while. And June is transitioning, as I understand it. We haven't heard anything new about that. Are there other prayers from our community? Yes.
Prayers of joy and thanksgiving that Russell and Dawn had a wonderful time at Western Regional Youth Event, and Russell is home safe.
God of love,
We thank you for your presence.
other prayers? Yes.
I just want to thank the Lord for my son turning 32 years old on Thursday. So,
Pray for
that.
Rodney's son. What's his name?
Corral.
Corral. God of love?
We thank you for your presence.
Yes.
I'd like to pray for our friend Jay, who's been recently oppressed, that he may reach out and find support.
For our friend Jay, who has had a tough time recently. God of love.
We thank you for your presence.
Dear Heavenly Father, Mother, be with us. Grant us strength and courage as we are the church, with the houseless and the food insecure, the sufferers and people in violent situations, the sick, the poor, and those without help. Help us bring peace and understanding to our congregation, to our neighborhood, our cities, and our world. Please join in this prayer from Luke. Abba God, help us to honor your name. Come and set up your kingdom. Give us each day the food we need. Forgive our sins as we forgive everyone who has done wrong to us. And keep us from being tempted. Amen.
If you look on the back of your bulletin, you'll see what we have going on next week. And do we have any announcements that need to be made? Come on down.
As we look at our Medicare and Medicaid programs in Oregon, it still leaves 483,477 people without insurance, and 22% of Oregons below the age of 65 with past due medical bills. And so it's time for us all to become more educated about what a good healthcare system involves. So I'd like to invite you to our July 7th conference with Dr. Mike Huntington from Corvallis. He's going to be talking about the resolution that the UCC Church is putting forth at their conference. And I'd also like to invite you to the Healthcare at a Tipping Point today at 11:30. It's Healthcare at a Tipping Point, we can fix it. So get your thinking hats on and think about making a better world. Thank you.
And I have two things to point out. Aaron is taking Monday off, so the office will be closed. And then on Wednesday, we won't have Bible study because it is the 4th of July and all that. So.
stand if you're able for our closing song, In the Bowl There Is a Flower. As we leave today, may the grace of God, the peace of Jesus, and the song in your heart be with you this week and always. Amen.
Amen.